A man is losing a war in a company parking lot, and there is not a single mark on him. It is 8:57 on a Tuesday morning. His engine has been off for 3 minutes. Nobody is threatening him. Nobody is even watching him. But a sentence has been circling his skull since 2 in the morning. And the sentence says, "They are about to find out you do not belong here." Here is a strange fact about the human race. Almost none of the battles that decide a life happen where anyone can see them. No referee, no crowd, no Bruises, just a parking lot, a hallway, a kitchen after midnight, and a fight that never makes a sound. 2,000 years ago, one man wrote down exactly what to wear into that kind of fight. He listed 6 pieces of armor, piece by piece, like a soldier packing for war, and the letter itself tells us where he was when he wrote it. In chains, a prisoner of Rome, held under guard in a rented room, waiting to hear whether the emperor would let him live. Think about that. A man in chains, facing execution, wrote the most famous description of victory equipment the world has ever seen, by every measure you can see. He was losing. He wrote like a man who was winning. Before this is over, you are going to know what he knew. But first, you need to see the battlefield. It is closer than you think. You drove through it this morning. Stay in that parking lot for a minute, because the man in the car deserves a closer look. His resume is real. His performance reviews are good. Last week, his boss cut him off in the middle of a sentence during a meeting and moved on to someone else. And that was the whole event. 14 seconds of ordinary corporate friction. But at 2 in the morning, something took those 14 seconds and went to work on them. By sunrise, the incident had grown teeth. They are pulling away from you. Everyone in that room saw it. You have been faking this for years. And the bill just came due. He would never say any of this out loud. Which is exactly the problem. A fight nobody hears is a fight nobody can help you win. Now, come across town, to a church hallway on a Sunday, because the second front is here. A woman is standing near the coffee table, and she is very good at this. She smiles at the right moments. She asks about people's kids. She says, "Blessed. Thank you." When anyone asks how she is doing, what nobody in that hallway knows is that she has not been able to pray in 6 weeks. Every time she tries, every time she so much as closes her eyes, a voice starts reading from a file. The file is from 2019. It holds one night, one decision, one thing she did that nobody in this building knows about. The voice never yells. It just reads, calmly, like a prosecutor with all the time in the world. So she stands there holding her coffee, 20 feet from people who love her, completely surrounded and completely alone. One more stop. A kitchen. Tonight, after 11, a father has just put his kids to bed. The house is quiet. His wife is asleep, and he is standing in the dark with his phone glowing in his hand. On the screen is a message he should not open, from a person he should not be thinking about. Nobody will ever know if he opens it. He knows that. The knowing is the whole attack. Every visible war in history had witnesses. This one has been designed, with real intelligence, to have none. 3 people, 3 ordinary rooms, not one bruise between them. That is the thing about the battles that actually decide a life. They leave no marks. They take place in parking lots and hallways and kitchens, in the 4 seconds before a decision, in the dark hours when the house is asleep, when you finally lose one. The world just sees a man who quit his job, a woman who drifted from her church, a family that came apart. The world sees the wreckage. It never sees the war, which raises a question human beings have been asking as long as we have been human. If the battle is invisible, what on earth do you wear into it? One man answered that question with a list. And to read the list the way it was meant to be read, you have to visit him. The year, by the traditional reckoning, is around 62 after Christ. The city is Rome, the loudest, richest, most powerful city on the planet. And in a small rented room, far from the marble and the noise, an old Jewish man sits under guard. The book of Acts says he lived like this for 2 years, welcoming visitors. A soldier always posted beside him, and when he wrote to his friends, he called himself an ambassador in chains. Roman custody of that kind often meant a literal chain. Wrist to wrist, prisoner to guard, around the clock. He has carried scars on his back for decades. 5 separate floggings. A stoning he somehow survived. 3 shipwrecks. Now he waits in the capital of the empire while a court under Nero decides his future. His name is Paul, and he is dictating a letter. Picture the room, because it is not hard to imagine. An oil lamp, a hired scribe hunched over parchment, the guard standing his shift, bored, close enough to touch, and Paul, pacing as far as a chain allows, building sentence after sentence for a small church in a city called Ephesus. Near the end of the letter, he pauses. Then he does something writers almost never do. He looks directly at his prison. The equipment is right there, an arm's length away, the thick leather belt cinched at the soldier's waist, the armor plates across the chest, the studded boots, the shield leaning in the corner, the helmet, the short sword on the hip, the gear of the empire that has taken his freedom and may soon take his life. He studies it, piece by piece, and he says, "Write this down. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand, not run, not hide, not even conquer. Stand." He repeats that word 4 times in a single breath of the letter, like a drumbeat. Stand. Withstand. Stand firm. Stand. Think about who is talking. A man in chains is describing armor. A man the empire has already beaten is explaining how not to lose. If a general on a white horse had written these words, we could file them under motivational speeches and move on. This came from a rented room, from a man whose visible war was over and lost, and he knew it. He was writing the one kind of victory still available to him. His claim, the claim we are going to test tonight, is that it was the only kind that ever mattered. Paul names 6 pieces. Each one guards a specific place where you are already being shot at. Your grip on what is true, the heart behind your ribs, the ground under your feet, your ability to believe, your mind and its hold on hope, and the words you reach for when the lie gets close enough to whisper. But hear the full promise before we start walking, because the 6 pieces are only half of it. Paul calls it the whole armor, one connected system, and hidden inside the design of this equipment is a detail almost nobody preaches, a detail that reveals who this armor was actually built for, and why no soldier who ever wore it was meant to wear it alone. 6 pieces, one system, one secret in the steel. We are going to find all of it. The tour starts in a strange place. The first attack almost never opens at the heart or the head. It opens at the one thing holding everything else together. And until it fails, you will not even know you are wearing it. Every Roman soldier got dressed in the same order, and the order was not negotiable. Before the breastplate, before the boots, before anyone handed him a weapon, he reached for a wide leather belt, and he cinched it hard around his waist. It looks like the least impressive piece in the kit. No shine, no blade, no glory. But watch what it does. The belt gathers the loose tunic so his legs stay free when he has to run. It carries the scabbard, so his sword rides exactly where his hand expects to find it. It anchors the armor to his body, so the plates protect him instead of rattling around on top of him. Every other piece of equipment assumes the belt is already there, already tight. Take it away and nothing falls off immediately. Everything just starts to shift. The sword drifts out of reach. The tunic tangles. The armor slides. A soldier without his belt is a man wearing expensive confusion. The Romans understood this so well that they built a punishment around it. A soldier who disgraced himself could be made to stand before the assembled ranks, stripped of one item only: his belt. Fully armored, fully armed, and beltless. While the whole unit looked on, nobody had to say a word. Every man watching knew the message. This one is no longer ready to fight. Paul sits an arm's length from a belt like that, and he gives it the first position in his list. Stand, he says, having fastened on the belt of truth. First truth, then everything else. He is telling you where the war actually begins. The opening attack in an invisible battle is almost never aimed at your courage. It is aimed at your version of reality. Get a person confused about what is actually true, and you never have to beat them. They will lose to their own conclusions. So let us go back to the parking lot and run a proper investigation. The man is still in his car. It is 8:58 now, since the whole fight is happening inside his head. Let us do what any decent detective does. Separate the evidence from the story. Here is the evidence. The complete file. Last Tuesday, in a status meeting, his boss interrupted him mid-sentence and turned to the next person. The meeting was running long. 14 seconds of friction. That is everything that verifiably happened. You could show the tape to a stranger, and the stranger would shrug. Now here is the story that got built on top of those 14 seconds. Mostly between 2 and 4 in the morning. The boss has lost confidence in him. The whole room noticed. His last project was actually a failure that everyone is too polite to name. He was never really talented. Just lucky. And the luck is expiring. They are about to find out he does not belong. Set the two columns side by side. 14 seconds of evidence. A life sentence of interpretation. Everything in the second column was manufactured after dark by a mind under attack. And not one item in it would survive cross-examination. The interruption is a fact. Everything else is a verdict. And the verdict came from somewhere with a clear interest in his defeat. That gap between the two columns is the first battlefield. Once you learn to see it, you will find it running through the middle of your own worst nights. The belt comes off a modern person in 3 moves, and they are almost mechanical. First, feelings get promoted to evidence. I feel useless quietly becomes I am useless. I feel abandoned becomes I have been abandoned. Notice the sleight of hand. A feeling is a weather report from inside your body. It can be triggered by an attack, by a memory, by 6 hours of missing sleep. The lie takes that weather report and stamps it as a court document. Real armor asks a rude question at exactly this point. Interesting feeling. Where's the proof? Second, a moment gets promoted to a definition. One failed project becomes I am a failure. One stupid sentence at a dinner party becomes I always ruin things. One season of dry prayer becomes I was never really a believer. The math here should insult you. 10,000 data points in a life. And the verdict gets written from one. The lie is never doing analysis. It is doing demolition. Third, and this one goes deepest. God's silence gets translated as God's absence. You prayed, and the ceiling did not move. You asked for a sign, and got a Tuesday. And in the quiet, something leans close and offers a translation. He is not answering because he is not there. Or worse, he is there and has stopped caring about you specifically. Entire faiths have bled out through that one mistranslation. Yet run it against the record and it collapses. Scripture is packed with people sitting inside long divine silences that turned out to be seasons. Not verdicts. The silence was real. The abandonment was invented. Feelings promoted to evidence. Moments promoted to definitions. Silence translated as absence. 3 quiet edits to reality. And a person can be fully dressed, fully talented, fully loved, and functionally beltless. So what does the belt look like in practice? On a Tuesday, in traffic, at 2 in the morning. 2 honest things need saying. The first is what truth will not do. Cinching this belt does not make the feelings vanish on command. The man in the car can name the lie perfectly, and his chest may still be tight when he walks into the building. Anyone who promises you that truth deletes anxiety by lunchtime is selling something. What truth does is quieter and more important. It demotes the feeling from commander back down to weather. The fear can still blow through. It no longer gets to give orders. The second is what wearing the belt actually means. And it is more ordinary than you want it to be. It means interrogating your own conclusions, like a detective who was not born yesterday. What actually happened here? Word for word. Second by second. And what got added afterward? In the dark. By fear with a pen in its hand. It means catching the promotion ceremony in real time. That is a feeling asking to be evidence. Denied. That is one bad Thursday asking to define 30 years. Denied. That is a quiet season asking to be read as an empty heaven. Denied. On the testimony of everyone who waded through silence and found out they were never alone in it. The lie works best unnamed. Half the battle, sometimes more than half, is simply saying out loud, that is not what happened. Here is what happened. And watching the thing shrink to its actual size. At 8:59, the man in the car has not solved his career, his boss, or his sleep. He has done one small soldier's task. He has laid the 14 seconds next to the life sentence and refused to let them trade places. The belt is on. It will need tightening again by Thursday. That was always how belts worked. Do not relax yet. Though, because the enemy of this fight is flexible. And here is the pivot that makes the war so vicious. When the lies about facts stop working, the attack reaches for a sharper weapon. It picks up things that are true. Real failures. Actual history. The file from 2019, with your name on it. Where every page checks out. There is a voice that has no need to slander you. Because it has your receipts. And it is about to read them out loud in the most hostile courtroom on earth. The one behind your own ribs. The woman from the hallway knows that courtroom. She has a hearing tonight. And the old man in Rome knows it too. Better than almost anyone alive. 30 years before he wrote about armor. He stood in a field holding the coats of the men who were killing an innocent man. And he approved of every stone. That trial, and the one piece of armor that can survive it, is next. The courtroom convenes at 11:40 at night, in a bedroom in a quiet suburb, and the defendant is a woman lying on her side pretending to be asleep. There is no gavel. There is no jury box. There is only the dark, and a voice that has been waiting all day for the house to go quiet. It waited through church. It waited through the coffee and the smiling and the blessed. Thank you. It waited through dinner and dishes and the last light clicking off. Now, with nothing left between it and her, the prosecutor rises, clears his throat, and opens a file marked 2019. Understand something about this prosecutor before he speaks. He is not going to lie. Lies were last chapter's strategy. And they are beneath him. This voice works exclusively with the truth. And that is what makes him the most dangerous attorney she will ever face. He begins to read, and every word checks out. On the night in question, you knew exactly what you were doing. You had time to stop. You counted the cost. And you did it anyway. Here is the date. Here is what you said to cover it. Here is the person you have never told. Sleeping beside you right now. Trusting a woman who does not exist. He pauses. He is a professional. He lets the silence do some of the work. And now, he says, you sit in that building on Sundays. You sing the songs. You hold the coffee. Tell the court. What exactly do you think you are doing there? People like you do not get to come back. Change is a costume. And underneath it, you are still the woman from 2019. And you will be her until you die. Then comes the moment every midnight defendant knows. The court turns to her for a defense, and she reaches for the only strategy the human heart seems to ship with. She reaches for her record. Objection. Your Honor. Consider the volunteering. Consider the meals delivered to sick neighbors. The money given quietly. The years of showing up. Weigh the good against the bad. And surely the scale tips. The prosecutor does not even look up. He simply asks, is the file inaccurate? And the whole defense folds. Because, no, the file is not inaccurate. And both of them know that 1,000 good deeds do not unhappen one night. Trying to outweigh an accusation with achievements is like trying to unring a bell by ringing other, nicer bells. The sound is still out there. The court falls silent. Verdict at dawn. Same as last night. Same as tomorrow night. 6 weeks now. This trial has been running. It is why she cannot pray. Every time she closes her eyes, she is back on the stand. Leave her there for a moment, because you need to see what a Roman soldier wore over his chest. And you need to see who is describing it. The breastplate was a shell of iron plates or hardened leather, wrapped around the torso and fitted to move with the body. Of all the armor, this was the piece that most obviously stood between a man and death, for reasons of simple anatomy. A soldier could take a cut on the arm and finish the fight. He could take a gash on the leg and be back in formation in a month. A blade through the chest ended the conversation, because behind those plates sat the heart and the lungs, the engine room, the things that keep everything else alive. And notice something odd about the design while we are here. Nearly all of that protection faces forward. The plates, the reinforcement, the engineering, the weight. It is all concentrated toward the front of the man, toward the enemy. Roman armor was never really built for a lone fighter circling in an alley, watching every direction. It was built on an assumption. And the assumption is one of the best kept secrets in this whole passage. Hold that detail. We are not ready for it yet. Paul looks at those plates rising and falling with a bored soldier's breathing, and he says, put on the breastplate of righteousness. Guard the engine room with rightness itself. Here is where we have to slow down, because that word, righteousness, has been mangled into something Paul would not recognize. To modern ears, it sounds like moral scorekeeping. A life so clean, the prosecutor finds nothing to read. If that is what the breastplate is, the woman in the bedroom is finished. And so are you. And so am I. But look at who is writing this sentence. Of all the men who ever lived, Paul is the one man who could never confuse righteousness with a clean record. Because Paul's record is soaked. 30 years earlier, he was the prosecutor. He was the rising star of his religion, with the most flawless resume of his generation. Educated under the best teacher, zealous beyond his peers, blameless before the law by his own description. And in those exact years, the years his file gleamed brightest, He stood in a field outside Jerusalem, watching a man named Stephen be stoned to death for his faith. And he held the coats of the killers. And he called it a good day's work. Then he asked for arrest warrants and went house to house, dragging believers out by the arm, breaking up families, voting for executions. The most religious man in the room was the most dangerous man in the room. His achievements were not failing to save him. His achievements were the weapon. That man is now sitting in a Roman rented room telling you about a breastplate. Whatever he means by righteousness, he cannot mean your record. He watched his own record commit murder. Here is what he means. And it is the only defense that has ever survived the midnight court. Somewhere on a desert road, Paul stopped presenting his own file and accepted a verdict that came from outside himself entirely. The logic runs like this. The night from 2019 was real. It does not get deleted, minimized, or renamed a mistake. It gets called exactly what it is. Sin. Out loud. Before God. It gets grieved. Turned from. Repented of, in the old full sense of that word. And then it gets answered. Paid for. By someone else. At an execution outside Jerusalem that Paul spent the rest of his life explaining. The record still exists. The sentence attached to it has already been served. By another. Watch what the defendant can now say. The prosecutor reads the file, every true word of it, and rests his case, certain as always, and she rises. And for the first time in 6 weeks, she does not reach for her good deeds. She says, everything you read is accurate, and it has already been answered. You are reading from a debt that has been paid in full. And a paid debt can be read aloud as many times as you like. It cannot be collected twice. That is the breastplate. A verdict stronger than the past. Forged somewhere else. By someone else. Which is precisely why the prosecutor cannot get through it. He could always out-argue her record. He cannot out-argue a settled account. And to be fair to the whole truth of it, that verdict is where a changed life begins. Because a person who has actually stood in that courtroom and heard the case dismissed does not walk out the same. The new standing grows a new kind of living. Grace was never a license to book next month's compromise in advance. Anyone using it that way has understood permission. And permission was never on offer. One distinction before we leave. Because getting it wrong has wrecked a lot of sincere people. 2 voices will bring up your sin, and they sound similar and could not be more different. One voice points at a specific thing you did and says, that was wrong. Deal with it. Come back. It is uncomfortable. Precise. And it always leaves a door open. Old writers called it conviction. And it is a friend wearing work gloves. The other voice points past the deed at your soul and says, this is what you are, and what you are cannot come back. It is vague about solutions, vivid about verdicts, and it never mentions the door. That one is the prosecutor, whatever accent he uses. Learn the difference, the way you would learn the difference between a surgeon's knife and a mugger's. One cuts to heal you, the other just cuts. The woman in the bedroom is still awake, but something in the room has shifted. The trial will probably reconvene. Courts like this one are stubborn, and 6 weeks of hearings do not end in a single night. But tonight, for the first time, the reading of the file did not end in silence. It ended in an answer. She sleeps. Eventually, Sunday is coming, and on Sunday there is something she needs to do. But that scene belongs to a later chapter. Feel what has changed in our tour so far. The belt holds your grip on what is true. The breastplate holds your heart against what is true. The real failures. The accurate accusations. The file that checks out. Truth secured. Heart secured. Which surfaces a problem nobody warns you about. A person can have both of those and still go down hard. In about 4 seconds. Because there is a third front. And it attacks neither your reality nor your worth. It attacks the floor. It waits for the phone call. The diagnosis. The Tuesday afternoon when the ground itself starts moving. And it makes one simple bet. That a human being who is slipping cannot fight at all. The Romans lost entire battles to that bet, before a single sword was raised, and the reason was written on the bottom of their boots. Nobody ever built a statue of a boot. Walk any museum of Roman glory, and you will find marble emperors, marble breastplates, marble helmets with plumes. The sculptors gave centuries of attention to everything a soldier wore above the ankles. But ask the men who actually stood in the line. Ask the veterans of the mud at dawn which piece of equipment they trusted their lives to. And a lot of them would have pointed down. The Roman military boot was a small piece of engineering genius. Layers of leather stitched into a heavy sole, laced tight over the ankle, open enough to keep a marching foot healthy on campaign, and driven up through that sole from below, in patterns the army refined over generations, were iron studs, hobnails, cleats, 2,000 years before anybody kicked a football. When a legionary planted his foot, those studs bit into turf, gravel, and mud, and held. Here is why that mattered enough to reach the Bible. Ancient battles were won and lost on footing. The battlefield was almost never a flat, dry field. It was a wet hillside, a plowed slope churned to slop, ground slicked with things we will not describe. And the armies of that world fought as walls of men, line against line, shield pressed on shield, every soldier shoving with everything he had. In that world, the fight was rarely decided by who swung hardest. It was decided by whose feet held. The man who slipped could not push, could not strike, could not even defend himself. And a line of slipping men is not an army anymore. Ancient writers record engagements that collapsed exactly this way. Formations beaten by ground they could not grip before courage ever entered the question. Every soldier understood the arithmetic. Before you can fight anything, you have to be able to stand. Paul, with his guard-studded boots an arm's length away, writes it this way: stand, having your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Peace, of all things, on your feet. Notice where he refuses to put it. We keep looking for peace in the sky. Some cloudless season when the problems finally stop. He nails it to the ground, to the grip under a person while the field itself is moving. To see what that means, you need to stand in a hallway for a while with someone whose field is moving right now. 4th floor of a hospital. 4 in the afternoon. A man sits in one of those stiff waiting room chairs outside a ward, and he has been there for 2 hours. Someone he loves is on the other side of the doors. People in scrubs keep walking past with faces trained to reveal nothing. His phone holds 9 unread messages. All of them, some version of any news. He has answers for none of them. 48 hours ago, his life had a calendar, a work schedule, a plan for next month. All of it is now theoretical. Between updates, there is nothing to do. And nothing is the hardest assignment he has ever been given. Watch closely, because the attack on this man is subtle, and the fear itself is honest. Fear is appropriate on this floor. Anybody with a pulse would be afraid here. The attack is what the instability whispers about the fear. It says, do something. Now, a moving floor demands a moving man. So his thumbs hover over search engines at 1 in the morning, reading survival statistics written about strangers. His mind drafts and redrafts conversations with doctors he has not met. He starts making promises. To God, to himself, renegotiating the universe at 3 in the morning. He snaps at his sister on the phone, then hates himself for it. Every hour on that floor, chaos taps him on the shoulder with a new, urgent motion. Decide something. Conclude something. Call someone. Fix it. Fix it. Fix it. There is a reason the pressure works this way. A person who has lost their footing will grab anything, and everything they grab while falling makes the fall worse. The panicked email gets sent. The worst-case scenario gets adopted as a plan. The rash decision gets made precisely because deciding feels like standing. For about 10 minutes, chaos never actually needs you to lose. It just needs you to slip. A slipping man does the losing all by himself. Against that, Paul offers boots. And the boots are made of something specific. Read his phrase again. The readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. This is peace with a source. Gospel is just the old word for news. An announcement of something that has already happened. Which means the peace on these boots is manufactured off the battlefield. Out of reach of the battle. The logic runs straight through the courtroom we just left. If the deepest question of your existence is settled, if the file is answered, and the account is paid, and the God who runs the universe is no longer your judge, but your father, then the worst thing that could ever be true of you is already impossible. The floor of all floors is poured and cured. Everything after that, including hospital hallways, is a battle fought from safety. Never a battle fought for it. Be clear about what this does not promise. Because cheap versions of this teaching have hurt people in rooms exactly like that hallway. The scan may come back bad. The fear may keep blowing through. He may cry in the stairwell tonight. And grief, if it comes, is the receipt for love. Never a failure of faith. The news behind the peace never promised smooth ground. It promised ground. So what does grip look like? Practically, at 4 in the afternoon on the 4th floor, it looks embarrassingly small. He puts the phone face down and stops reading statistics about strangers. He answers the 9 messages with one honest sentence. No news yet. Thank you for standing with us. Instead of managing everyone's feelings, he refuses to sign the 3 in the morning contracts. The bargains and the catastrophes both. Because binding decisions can wait for daylight when the floor is moving. He prays without a script. Less like a negotiation and more like a man leaning his weight onto something and finding that it holds. None of this changes what happens behind the doors. All of it changes what happens in the chair. The floor keeps moving. He is still standing. And he would be the first to tell you it has nothing to do with him being strong. The grip was never in the ground. It was in the boots. That is the 3rd piece. Truth around you. A verdict over your heart. Grip under your feet. Planted in news, the situation cannot revoke. You would think, 3 pieces in, that a person this equipped could finally exhale. The enemy thinks otherwise. Standing your ground changes your status on the battlefield. It makes you a target that holds still. And the arsenals of the ancient world contained a weapon built precisely for men who refuse to move. A weapon designed to break minds rather than bodies. And it came over the wall trailing fire. The attacks are about to speed up. The next piece of armor is the one you raise when the answers are still miles away and the sky is already burning. Before you can understand the shield, you have to understand the weapon it was built to answer. So stand on a wall for a minute, in a city under siege, somewhere in the ancient world, and watch the sky. It is an hour past sunset when the first one comes over. A thin line of orange, arcing out of the dark, almost beautiful, like a slow comet. Then another, then 20. The defenders on the wall have a name for these. The Romans called them malleoli, little hammers. An arrow wrapped behind the head with fibers soaked in pitch and resin. lit, and launched in volleys. And here is what you need to know about fire arrows. The fact that explains everything about this chapter. They were not really designed to kill men. Armor stopped most arrows. Fire arrows were designed to do something better. They were designed to make men stop protecting themselves. Watch how it works. An arrow thuds into a wooden shield and sticks there, burning, 6 inches from a soldier's face, heat on his cheek, flame crawling toward his hand, and every instinct in his body screams one command: drop it, throw the shield down, beat out the fire, get the burning thing away. The moment he does, he is a man standing on a wall with no shield. And the archers below were counting on exactly that. The fire was never the attack. The fire was the argument for dropping your defense. The real arrows come next. That is the weapon. Now hear how Paul ranks the piece that answers it. Because he breaks his own pattern to do it. Down the list he goes. Belt, breastplate, boots, steady as a quartermaster. And then suddenly the language lifts. Above all, he says, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Above all, and notice, he does not say dodge the arrows. He does not say the arrows will stop coming. He says extinguish. The arrows are assumed. The fire is assumed. The question of the whole chapter is only this: what happens when they hit? You already know what the modern arrows are. You have taken volleys of them. They come at the speed of thought, usually in the dark, usually in flights of 3 and 4, and they burn on contact. The worst is definitely going to happen. That one hits the man from the hospital hallway around 1 in the morning. Between updates, God has forgotten you. That one lands on the woman from the church hallway. Week 6. Mid-prayer. You will never change. This is just who you are. That one is aimed at the father in the kitchen, and it arrives, cleverly, right after he resists, because the enemy shoots at victories too. If you stop holding everything together, everything falls apart. Nobody can actually be trusted. You are one mistake from losing all of it. Look at the engineering shared by every arrow in that quiver. Not one of them waits for evidence. That is the signature. A true thought walks up in daylight and shows its documents. These things come screaming out of the dark at velocities no fact could ever travel. And they arrive on fire. Because the burning is the point. Panic is the point. An anxious thought you cannot put down at 2 in the morning is doing to you precisely what pitch and resin did to a man on a wall. It is trying to fill your hands, hijack your attention, and convince you that the only way to stop the burning is to throw down your defenses. Quit praying. It is not working anyway. Skip church. You cannot face those people. Stop hoping. Hope is what keeps getting you hurt. Pull back from everyone. Trust is how they get you. Every one of those decisions feels like firefighting. Every one of them is a man flinging away his shield on a wall. In range. At night, so Paul says. Take up the shield. And the shield he is looking at deserves a close description, because it was one of the marvels of the ancient world. The scutum, not a little round buckler for dueling. A door, 4 feet tall, curved like a section of barrel to wrap around the man carrying it. Built from 3 layers of wood, glued crosswise, so a blow that split one grain jammed against the next. A legionary could plant it on the ground and crouch, and functionally disappear. But wood burns. The Romans knew wood burns. So before battle, when scouts reported fire coming, the legions did something almost comically simple. The shield was faced with rawhide, and the soldiers soaked it. They doused the leather in water until it was heavy and dark and dripping. And when the little hammers came arcing down out of the night and struck that surface, they hissed. That is the sound of this entire chapter. The hiss of a burning arrow meeting a soaked shield. The flame that was engineered to cause panic goes out on contact and hangs there, a dead stick, in front of a soldier who did not even step backward. Now stop and look hard at that image, because it is quietly the most honest picture of faith in the whole armor. The shield did not resist fire because of anything in the wood. Left to itself, the scutum was fuel. It resisted fire because it had been drenched, before the battle, from a source outside itself. And no soldier soaked his shield while the arrows were in the air. You cannot. The soaking is preparation, done in calm, on purpose, over and over. Or it is not done at all, which corrects, in one image, almost everything our era gets wrong about faith. We talk about faith as if it were a personality trait, something optimists are born carrying, and the rest of us just burn. And we talk about it as if it could be generated mid-crisis, summoned by willpower at the exact moment the sky catches fire. Both ideas are wrong the same way. Faith is not the wood being strong. Faith is the wood being wet. It is a shield that has spent unglamorous hours being soaked. In truth, in prayer, in the actual character of God, before anything was burning, so that when the arrow arrives, and it will arrive, it meets water it did not expect, and be precise about what this faith is. Because the counterfeits are everywhere, and they get people hurt. It is not denial. The shield never pretends arrows do not exist. Its entire design concedes they are coming. It is not optimism, a temperament bet that things work out, because things do not always work out, and every adult knows it. And it is not certainty about outcomes. The confident claim that God will deliver the specific result you have in mind on the timeline you prefer. Scripture never signs that contract. Here is what it is. Faith is putting your full weight on the character of God when the outcome is still invisible. Not weight on the result you want. Weight on who He is. The way the man in the hospital chair leaned back and found the thing held. The three young men in the book of Daniel, standing in front of a literal furnace, said it perfectly. Our God is able to deliver us. And even if He does not, we will not bow. Wait on the character, not the outcome. That sentence is a soaked shield, and it hissed against the hottest arrow a king could fire. So when the 2 a.m. volley comes, and the thought lands burning, the worst is definitely going to happen. Faith does not argue with it like a debate partner, and does not obey it like a commander. It holds up what is actually known. You have no evidence for that arrow. None. It came out of the dark. Here is what I do have evidence for. A character that has held every previous time the sky burned. A file full of answered accusations. A floor that has not moved. The arrow burns against that, and hisses, and hangs there, dead. It did not go through. You did not throw down the shield. Tonight, that is the whole victory. And it is enough. One more detail before we leave the wall. And this one you are not allowed to forget. Because a debt in this file will come due later, and this is the deposit. Look at the edges of the scutum. They are strange. The top and bottom and sides are cut flat, square, deliberately. And if you only ever pictured one soldier, the design makes no sense. A lone fighter would want a round shield. The edges are flat because this shield was built to lock. Rim against rim. Shield against shield. One man's edge sealed to the next man's, until there was no seam for an arrow to find. One scutum was a door. A line of them, locked, was a wall. And certain formations of them were very nearly a fortress. Hold that. We are not ready for it yet. But if you have ever wondered why your shield, faithfully carried, still feels thin at the edges. Why the fight keeps finding the gap just past your rim? The answer is in those flat edges, and it is waiting in a later chapter. For now, the shield is up, and the volley is bouncing dead off wet leather. And that is exactly when the strategy on the other side changes. Because a besieging enemy who cannot get fire over your shield stops shooting at your body. There is one attack the scutum cannot answer, because it does not fly, and it does not burn, and you cannot hold anything up against it, because it is already inside. It walked in through your ears years ago, and it sits in the one room the shield cannot cover, patiently, asking a single question over and over. How does this story end? There is an old and ugly piece of military wisdom, and it goes like this. You do not have to destroy an army to defeat it. You only have to make it forget why it is fighting. Soldiers with weapons in their hands and armor on their bodies will stop fighting, will simply stand down in the middle of a field. The moment they become convinced, the war is already lost. Nothing about their equipment changed. Nothing about their strength changed. The battle moved into a country no sword reaches, the 6 inches between the ears, and it was decided there. Every great commander in history has known this. And so, it turns out, does the enemy of your soul. Which brings us to the helmet, and to why a Roman took such extraordinary care of his head. The gallia was a bowl of iron or bronze, padded inside, with a flared plate at the back to guard the neck, hinged cheek pieces closing over the face, and a reinforcing bar across the brow to catch a downward cut. Legions poured craftsmanship into helmets, and the reasoning was cold and clear. A soldier could take a wound to the arm and still be a soldier. He could lose fingers and hold a line, but a hard blow to the head produced something the ancients found more unsettling than death. A man still on his feet who was no longer himself, still upright, still armored, still holding a sword, and unable to remember his orders, unable to read the battle, unable to recognize the standard of his own legion 50 feet away. Every other wound diminished a soldier. A head wound erased him. The body kept standing there like a house with the lights cut. Paul, whose guard's helmet sits 4 feet away, catching lamplight, writes, "Take the helmet of salvation, guarding the mind," and to feel why he matched that word to that location. You have to watch the modern version of a head wound happen, because it is happening tonight, everywhere, in the most ordinary houses on your street. It is a Thursday afternoon, and a man is sitting at a kitchen table that has become an office, in the sense that a laptop lives there now, surrounded by envelopes. 6 months ago he had a title, a team, a badge that opened doors. The company restructured. Since then he has sent out 59 applications, and this morning he sent the 60th. And the replies, when they come at all, are form letters signed by no one. It is the hour of the afternoon when working people are busy, and he is not. And the house is very quiet. Now, pay close attention, because the attack that comes for him is not a fire arrow. Fire arrows are fast, hot, hysterical. This is slower and better dressed. It arrives around the 4th month, reasonable as an accountant, and instead of screaming, it simply offers to narrate. It says, "Let us be honest with each other. You and I. This is not a rough chapter anymore. This is the story now. And a reasonable man, tired enough, alone enough, starts nodding along. Watch what the narrator does with each part of the story, because the method matters. It takes the present and stretches it to the horizon. This is how it is, and how it is how it will always be. It takes the pain and promotes it from a chapter to the ending. Other people get turnarounds. Your genre is decline. It takes his worth and quietly indexes it to his output. You are what you produce. And look at the inbox. You are producing nothing, and then it goes for the deepest thing he has. And it does not attack his faith directly. Nothing so crude. It just reaches for his identity and starts, gently, to unbuckle it. The man who prayed with his kids. The man God had plans for. That was a man with a salary and a purpose. Look in the mirror. This is just who you are now. This is just who you are now. Mark that sentence. Because that is the sound of a helmet coming off. Not a scream. A sigh. The man has not renounced anything. He still believes every article of the creed. And he could pass a theology exam cold. What is being taken is not his doctrine. It is his ability to remember which war he is in and whose army he belongs to. Hopelessness is not a mood. Hopelessness is a head wound. The body keeps standing there, sending applications, attending church, saying the right words at dinner, and the lights inside are going out one room at a time. Against that, Paul says one word: salvation. And here is where you have to slow down, because the word is bigger than the small thing we have made of it. Ask around and salvation gets described as a transaction completed once. A ticket punched. A box checked in the past tense. Paul, writing elsewhere, speaks of it in 3 tenses. Like a fortress with 3 walls. And the man at the kitchen table needs all 3 of them tonight. The first wall stands in the past. I have been saved. Something happened. At a specific point. That does not unhappen when the income stops. The verdict from the courtroom chapter. The file answered. The account paid. None of that was denominated in dollars. And the layoff has no jurisdiction over it. So, when the narrator says, "This is what you are," the first wall answers with the oldest fact in his possession. What I am was decided somewhere else. By someone else. At a fixed point in history. And it is not up for quarterly review. The past tense of salvation means the past has lost its power to issue final verdicts. So has the present. The second wall stands in the present. And it is the one the narrator works hardest to hide. I am being saved. Right now. In the silence. In the 60 rejections. Something is still under construction. Here is the truth about how God grows people. And nobody likes it. It is slow. It is slow, the way orchards are slow. The way healing is slow. The way every living thing worth anything is slow. 6 months of no visible progress is not evidence of abandonment. Most of what an orchard does in a year is invisible from the road. The narrator points at the quiet and says, "Nothing is happening." The second wall answers, "Nothing visible is happening." And those are different sentences. Slow is not the same word as stopped. And it has never once been the same word as over. And the third wall stands in the future. And this is the one that makes the helmet a helmet. I will be saved. The story has an ending. And it has already been written. And here is the part that changes Thursday afternoon. The ending is not authored by the current chapter. Christian hope is not the greeting card promise that every chapter will be easy. Chapters can be brutal. Scripture is full of brutal ones. Prisons and famines, and long silences that lasted years. Christian hope is a harder and better thing. It is the settled conviction that no chapter, however painful, has the authority to write the ending. The pen is simply not in the chapter's hand. It never was. The pain gets a voice. It does not get the last word. That is the entire war of this front. 4 words long. Who writes the ending? The narrator says the present does. The helmet says the present is not even allowed in the room where that gets decided. So watch the man at the kitchen table put the helmet back on. And notice how unspectacular it looks. He does not get a phone call with an offer. Not this afternoon. Nothing about the envelopes changes. What changes is a sentence. When the narrator leans in with, "This is just who you are now." Something in him, worn and unimpressive and stubborn, answers back, "No, this is where I am. It is not what I am. Where I am is month 6 of a hard chapter. What I am was settled at a point in the past, is under construction in the present, and is guaranteed a future that this table, this inbox, and this silence have no authority to cancel." Then he stands up and does the next small thing, because that is what a man with a guarded mind looks like from the outside. Ordinary, unglamorous, and still in the war. Application 61 goes out Friday morning. Step back now and count what has been placed. Truth cinched around the middle, holding reality in position. The breastplate over the heart. A verdict from outside, answering the file inside. Boots gripping ground the situation cannot shake. The shield up and soaked, hissing against everything the dark can launch. The helmet down over the mind, guarding the ending. 5 pieces, and run your eye across all 5. Slowly, because there is a pattern hiding in the list. And the pattern is this. Everything so far protects. Everything holds, catches, guards, absorbs. 5 pieces in. And the soldier Paul has been building cannot yet do one single thing back. Paul saves that piece for last. And it is last for a reason. It is the only weapon in the list. The only piece that moves toward the enemy instead of bracing against him. And it is small enough to fit in one hand. But before he hands it to you, understand what you are picking up. Because the first recorded duel ever fought with this weapon was not fought by a soldier at all. It was fought in a desert, by a starving man, alone, 40 days from his last meal. And the enemy who walked out of that heat shimmer to face him did something no fire arrow ever did. He opened the scriptures, quoted them accurately, chapter and verse, and aimed them like a blade. The most dangerous liar in the universe knows your Bible, and he is about to prove it. The Judean wilderness is not sand. People picture soft dunes, and the truth is worse. A furnace of broken rock and hardpan, ridges of yellow stone stacked against a sky with no ceiling. Heat coming up off the ground like something exhaled. Nothing grows there worth eating. Nothing moves at noon. It is the kind of landscape that does not merely fail to support life. It seems to have opinions about it. A man has been out here for 40 days. He came in strong, straight from a river and a voice from heaven. And the fast has burned all of that down to the frame. 40 days without food does specific things to a body. The fat goes first, then muscle, and the mind, running on fumes, becomes strangely clear and strangely fragile at once. Hunger stops being a feeling and becomes a country you live in. This is the moment. The record says, when the tempter came, of course it is. Wolves do not test the herd at its strongest. He waited 40 days for a reason. And what happens next is the oldest sword fight on record. 3 exchanges. And if you have ever wondered what the last piece of armor actually looks like in use, there is no better film to study. Watch the blades. First exchange. The voice starts where the pain is loudest. If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Feel how reasonable that is. It is not even asking him to do something evil. Bread is not a sin, and he is starving, and he has the power. Just a small proof, a small provision, a small step off the path of trust and onto the path of self-supply. The hungry man answers with a sentence written 15 centuries earlier. It is written. Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. On stroke, the exchange is over. Notice he does not debate nutrition or defend his credentials. He plants a written truth in the ground like a standard and stands behind it. Second exchange. And now pay very close attention, because what happens here is the reason this chapter exists. The tempter changes weapons. He takes the man to the highest point of the temple, the drop yawning below. And this time, the devil quotes scripture. Throw yourself down, he says, for it is written. And then, word for word, accurate to the letter, he recites Psalm 91. He will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Stop the film right there and look at that. The quotation is real. Psalm 91 says exactly that. You can check it tonight. Every word out of the enemy's mouth in this exchange is Bible, and it is a lie. It is a real promise about God protecting his people on their way. Ripped out of its home and re-aimed as a dare. Jump. Force his hand. Make him prove it on your schedule. The verse is true. The use is poison. And with that one move, the desert teaches the single most important lesson anyone will ever learn about this weapon. Knowing the words is not the same as holding the sword. The most dangerous liar in existence can recite your scriptures with perfect accuracy. If quotation were power, he would be the safest person to follow in the universe. The starving man parries with context. It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Also written, two words that contain an entire education. He does not deny Psalm 91. He completes it. He answers the torn-out verse with the whole counsel. Scripture read against scripture until the twisted blade snaps. The promise of protection was never a license for manipulation. And he knows that. Not because he memorized harder, but because he knows the one making the promise. Third exchange. The mask comes off. All the kingdoms of the world in exchange for one bow. And the answer comes fast now. Away from me, Satan. For it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And then the strangest sentence in the account. The devil left him, the most relentless being in creation, out of arguments, walking away from a half-starved man whose only weapon was a handful of sentences he did not merely know, but inhabited. That is the sword. Now look at the steel itself. Because Paul, back in the rented room, chose his metaphor with a soldier's precision. And the soldier he is chained to wears the evidence on his hip. The Roman sword was called the gladius. And the first thing everyone gets wrong about it is the size. Movies want swords long and gleaming. Blades, like fence rails, swung from horseback. The gladius was short. Roughly the length of your arm from elbow to fingertip. Double-edged, with a point built for thrusting. It looked almost modest next to the great slashing blades of Rome's enemies. And it conquered the world, because the gladius was not built for showing off at a distance. It was built for the press, the last 3 feet. The range where the shields are locked and the enemy is close enough that you can hear him breathe. Long swords need room. The gladius worked exactly where there was no room left. Historians of Rome say the legions won their empire at precisely the range where everyone else's weapons became useless. Now hear Paul's sentence with that blade in mind. Take the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. He gave the Word of God the shape of a gladius. And the choice is telling you 2 things. First, this weapon is for close work. The lie that matters is never the one shouted from a distance. It is the one whispered from 3 feet, from inside your own head, at the range where arguments and willpower and good intentions have all stopped working. That is, gladius, range. And second, in the whole inventory. This is the only weapon. 5 pieces hold and guard and absorb. 1 piece answers back, which means a believer with every defense and no sword can survive almost anything, and can end almost nothing. You can block a lie for years. Only truth, spoken, actually cuts one down. But a sword is the most dangerous piece in the kit, and not only to the enemy. So before you carry it, learn the grips. There are 4, and only one of them is right. There is the grip of the desert enemy himself. The verse torn from context and aimed at someone's obedience. Scripture as crowbar. Every cult runs on this grip. And so, more quietly, does every believer who has learned to find a verse for whatever they already wanted to do. The blade works loose from its home and becomes, in that hand, exactly what it was in the tempter's. True words in service of a lie. There is the grip of the debater. The sword swung at people. You have met this grip. Verses fired across dinner tables to end arguments. Scripture deployed to win rather than to heal. The Bible as a weapon in precisely the wrong sense. Here is the test that exposes it. And it is worth memorizing. In the desert, the sword was drawn against deception, never against the deceived. The blade is for cutting lies, not for cutting people. And a Christian using Scripture to bleed someone in an argument has picked up the right weapon in the wrong war. There is the grip of the collector, and this one is the saddest. The sword kept gleaming and never drawn. Verses framed on walls. Apps downloaded. Plans subscribed to. A blade polished for display in a life where every actual battle gets fought bare-handed. Knowledge stacked like inventory. The desert showed the difference between owning words and living inside them. And inventory, at 3 feet, in the dark, is worth nothing. And then there is the 4th grip. The desert grip. Truth, known in context. Held with humility. Spoken at the exact point of attack. Not 100 verses. Watch the film again. The whole war was won with 3 sentences. But they were the right 3. Driven into the precise joints of the precise lies. That is thrusting work. Gladius work. Close. Specific. And final. So what does training look like? For a person with a job and a family and no seminary in sight. Smaller than you fear. Not the whole book, memorized by spring. Find the handful of passages that speak to your actual war. The arrows that actually fly at you. And learn those few deeply. What they meant when written. What they answer now. If your 2 in the morning arrow says you are disqualified by your past, your blade might be. There is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. If the narrator keeps reaching for your ending, perhaps being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. A soldier does not need an armory on his back. He needs one good blade, close to hand, that he has practiced drawing until the draw is faster than the lie. And practice happens before the fight. Always before. Nobody learns sword work mid-ambush, which brings us back, one last time tonight, to a dark kitchen, because a man is standing in it with a phone glowing in his hand. And this battle has reached the last 3 feet. The message is still on the screen. The house is still asleep, and the voice is very close now. Closer than conscience usually lets things get. And it is whispering the oldest lines in its repertoire. No one will know. You deserve something for yourself. It does not even have to mean anything. Look at the range. His shield cannot help him here. The arrow is already inside. His resolutions have been losing ground for 10 minutes. Because willpower at 3 feet is a man wrestling smoke. What he needs is not a feeling and not a technique. He needs steel that was put in the scabbard before tonight, and there is one there, a sentence he half memorized years ago and sharpened without knowing why. It comes up now. Awkward, unpolished, but drawn. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Old words. A young man's words from the book of Genesis. Spoken once in another bedroom, 3,000 years ago, by a servant named Joseph, with a door he could have locked. The whisper has no answer for it. Whispers never do. That is the strange thing about drawn truth. It does not argue. It reveals. And what it reveals tonight is the actual name of the thing on the screen. Not an escape. A wickedness. Named. It shrinks. The man puts the phone face down on the counter. Then, because he has learned something about himself in the last 10 minutes, he picks it back up, deletes the message, and blocks the number. 2 motions. Nobody saw them. Nobody applauded. Heaven, presumably, noticed. It was not the whole war. The voice will try other doors on other nights. But tonight ended in a thrust, not a surrender. And wars made of nights like this one bend. Night by night. Toward the man who keeps drawing. 6 pieces. The belt. The breastplate. The boots. The shield. The helmet. The sword. The set is complete. And this is where every sermon you have ever heard on this passage rolls the credits. 6 lessons. 6 virtues. Get dressed, and good luck. Do not roll them yet, because there is a question the list never answers. And it is the question that explains why so many sincere, Bible-loving, church-attending believers still go down. What happens to a soldier wearing 5 pieces out of 6? What happens to armor that is almost complete? The answer is not what you think, and it deserves its own chapter, because the 6 pieces were never actually 6 separate things. Take one away, and watch what happens to the other 5. It is 4:15 on a Tuesday afternoon when the meeting invitation appears. No agenda. Conference room B. His manager and a woman from Human Resources already seated when he walks in. The meeting takes 11 minutes. The company is restructuring. His position has been eliminated. None of this reflects on his performance. There is a folder with information about his severance. Somebody says the word transition several times. At 4:40, a man who had a career at 4:15 is standing in the parking lot holding a cardboard box with a plant in it, trying to remember where he parked. Now slow everything down, because what happens in that parking lot over the next hour is the whole argument of this chapter. You have spent 6 chapters learning the pieces one at a time. One front, one piece. In sequence. Real war is not polite enough to attack in sequence. Real war opens every front at once. On one man. In one car. Before he even gets the key in the ignition. Watch the volleys come. And watch what a full set of armor does. The first arrow is airborne before the box hits the passenger seat. They cut you because you were never good enough. And everybody in that building knew it before you did. Fast. Hot. No evidence attached. And the belt answers. Because the belt's whole job is separating the file from the fiction. Here is the file. The company eliminated an entire department. 12% of headcount. In a restructuring announced to shareholders. That is what happened. Never good enough is not in the file. It was added. In flight. By something with an interest in his destruction. Feeling worthless is tonight's weather. It is not the forecast. And it is not the verdict. The second attack does not fly. It walks up quietly. And it aims at the chest. So how does it feel? It asks. To drive home and tell your wife you could not protect them. The shame arrow. The one that skips past what happened and goes straight for what you are. And the breastplate answers. Not with his record. His record just took a hit. But with the verdict that was never denominated in job titles. What this man is worth was settled outside that building. By an account already paid. And Conference Room B has no jurisdiction over it. A man can lose a salary. The verdict over his heart is not employed by that company. And it did not get restructured at 4:15. The third assault is the ground itself. Sometime around 5. In traffic. The floor starts moving. And the voice of the earthquake says, "Decide everything now. Call your brother-in-law about that thing he mentioned. List the house tonight. Take the first job that answers. Any job. Tonight. Move. Move. Move." And the boots answer with the oldest military wisdom there is. You do not make binding decisions while the ground is still shaking, if they can possibly wait for daylight. Peace is not the absence of the earthquake. Peace is grip during one. Tonight there is one assignment. Drive home. Tell the truth. Eat dinner with the family. The decisions belong to daylight. And daylight is coming. The fourth volley arrives on schedule. At 2 in the morning. In flights. 6 months from now, the savings are gone. Then the house. Your kids will remember this year as the year everything broke. It is all going to burn. And the shield comes up. Soaked. And holds. Because not one of those arrows is carrying evidence. They are carrying fire. And fire is designed to make a man drop his defenses and panic in the dark. Against the flames he sets what he actually knows. A character that has held through every previous winter. A family asleep down the hall. A file with no catastrophes in it. Only tonight. The arrows hiss and die in the leather. He does not sleep well. He sleeps. The fifth attack is patient. It waits 3 weeks. For the silence after the first rejections. And it comes as the narrator. Reasonable and well-dressed. Let us be honest. It says, "This is not a chapter. This is the story now. This is just who you are." And the helmet answers with 3 walls. What I am was settled in the past. Is under construction in the present. And has an ending already written by an author this chapter has never met. Where I am is unemployed. What I am is not. The pen is not in the chapter's hand. And the 6th attack comes last. Because it always comes last. After the defenses have been standing a while, and the man is tired of defending. Week 3. An old contact calls with an opportunity. Real money. Fast. And 1 paragraph of the arrangement is the kind of paragraph you read twice and decide not to think about. The shortcut. Not an arrow. A whisper at 3 feet. Everyone does some version of this. Your family needs it. It is barely even gray, and the sword comes out of the scabbard. 1 blade. Kept sharp for exactly this. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? Spoken. The paragraph gets its true name. Named. It shrinks. He declines by email the next morning. Short and polite. And closes the laptop. And the whisper moves on to look for an easier kitchen. 6 attacks. 6 answers. That is the whole armor. Working the way it was built to work. Not as 6 lessons, but as one system with no seams. And now, watch the demonstration this chapter exists for. Run the same hour again. The same parking lot. The same man. And remove exactly 1 piece. Take the belt. Only the belt. Leave him everything else. The verdict. The grip. The shield. The helmet. The blade. The first arrow flies. Never good enough. And everybody knew. But now there is no line between the file and the fiction. So the fiction gets filed as fact. and feel the chain reaction. Because here is what nobody tells you about the armor. The shame attack no longer needs to pierce the breastplate. It just presents the paperwork the belt let through. This is not an accusation anymore. It is the record. You are the man who was never good enough. It says so, right here. The verdict over his heart still stands. But he can no longer tell the verdict from the forgery. The ground shakes harder. Because a man whose reality is sliding has nothing to plant his boots against. The 2 in the morning arrows land on dry wood. Every catastrophe pre-approved. Because the sorting station that separates evidence from fire went dark at 4:40. The narrator does not even have to argue. And the sword. The sword is still on his hip and still sharp. But a blade, guided by a corrupted map of reality, swings at the wrong things. At his boss. At his wife. At himself. At God. One strap. One buckle. The whole soldier. Disarmed from the waist. Take a different piece instead. Take the boots. Leave everything else on. Now every attack arrives while he is sliding. And a sliding man cannot raise a shield with any strength. Cannot thrust with any accuracy. Cannot even stand still and let the breastplate do its work. His panic makes the decisions his wisdom should have made. And the decisions become new battlefields. Take only the helmet, and the strangest ruin of all unfolds. A man fully armored who no longer remembers why he is fighting. Blocking arrows out of habit. Sword in hand. Hope gone. Defending a story he has privately concluded is already over. The body stands there. The lights are going out. You see it now. Paul saw it first. And he wrote it into the text so plainly that we read past it. Twice in this passage. Twice within 4 sentences. He uses the same phrase. Put on the whole armor of God. The whole armor. Not the pieces that suit your temperament. Not truth for the intellectuals and feeling for the rest. Not shield for the anxious and sword for the bold. The set. Because he was not writing a menu. He was describing a body. An armor is like a body. The pieces do not add. They interlock. 5 out of 6 is not 83% protected. 5 out of 6 is a soldier with an address painted on him. Because the enemy of your soul does not attack your strong points. He is omniscient and patient, and he has watched you long enough to build a gap. So do the honest thing this chapter has been building toward. And audit yourself. 1 question per piece. Quickly. Nobody watching. Where does your armor open? Is it the belt? Do feelings get promoted to facts in your 3A? M. Courtroom. The breastplate. Does an old file still read itself to you at night as though the account were unpaid? The boots. Does chaos own your reactions the moment ground shifts? The shield. Do the burning thoughts land dry? The helmet. Has some long, hard chapter quietly hired itself as your narrator? The sword. When the whisper gets to 3 feet, is there any steel in the scabbard? Or has the blade been on the wall so long the draw's gone? You know your gap. Everyone knows their gap. The enemy certainly knows it. He has been shooting at it for years. Which is exactly why the question is worth 60 seconds of your honesty tonight. But now stand back from all of this. The system. The interlock. The audit. Because there is a misunderstanding growing at the edge of this chapter. And left alone it will poison everything the file has built. 6 pieces. 1 seamless system. A soldier answering every attack. Squint. And it starts to look like an armored man never staggers. Never weeps. Never needs anyone. Never feels the arrows, even as they die in the leather. It starts to look like faith means performing invincibility. The man who wrote this passage would like a word about that. Because the letters he sent across that empire contained sentences no invincible man would ever put in writing. Sentences about despairing of life itself, about tears, about begging God 3 times for relief and hearing no. The strongest description of spiritual armor in history was written by a man who openly, repeatedly, on the record, broke down. And until you can hold those 2 facts in one hand, the armor and the weeping, you have not yet understood either one. Go back to the rented room in Rome one more time, because there is something in the corner of that scene we have been walking past for 8 chapters, and it is time to stop and look at it. The old man is dictating. The scribe is writing. The soldier is standing his shift, bored, 4 feet of chain away, and on the table, or in a satchel, or stacked wherever a prisoner keeps his papers, are copies and drafts of the other letters, the ones this same man wrote to other churches across the empire. We quote those letters in stained glass fragments, verses lifted out and framed, and the frames hide something. Read the letters whole, the way the first churches read them, and a different man emerges than the one the paintings show. Not a marble saint with a serene face and a sunbeam, something far more unsettling and far more useful. Here is this man, in his own words, on the record, to the church in Corinth. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Read that again slowly. The author of the armor passage, the man who cataloged every piece of God's protection, wrote to an entire congregation that there was a season when he wanted to die. He did not encrypt it. He did not soften it into a testimony with the ending pre-attached. He mailed it to the same city. Later, he described a torment he called a thorn in his flesh. Nobody knows exactly what it was. An illness, an injury, some relentless affliction. And the not knowing is its own gift, because every sufferer since has been able to write their name on it. What we do know is what he did about it. He pleaded with the Lord 3 times to take it away. 3 separate campaigns of prayer from the most spiritually powerful man of his generation. And the answer was no. The thorn stayed. He wrote about serving God through weakness, through tears, through conflicts on the outside and fears on the inside. His letters mention weeping so often that if you removed every reference to tears, some pages would go thin. Set those 2 portraits side by side, because your entire understanding of this file depends on holding them together. The man who wrote, "Put on the whole armor of God. Stand firm. Stand your ground," is the same man who wrote, "We despaired of life itself. And I begged 3 times, and the answer was no." Same hand, same ink. And here is the claim of this chapter. The claim that separates real armor from the costume version. Those 2 sets of sentences do not contradict each other. They explain each other. The armor was never designed to make a man stop feeling the war. It was designed to keep the war from taking him. There is a difference. And the difference is everything, because somewhere along the way, a counterfeit version of this teaching got loose in the church, and it has hurt more people than most open attacks ever managed. The counterfeit says, "An armored believer does not stagger." It says, "If your faith were real, you would not be this anxious, this tired, this sad." It says, standing firm means feeling firm. And if you do not feel firm, check your armor. Something must be missing. And the something is probably you. You have heard this. Maybe from a pulpit. Maybe from a well-meaning friend. Maybe from the meanest preacher of all. The one inside your own head. And people crushed under that teaching learn a survival skill. They perform. They polish the outside of the armor for public viewing. They become the woman in the church hallway, smiling on schedule, saying blessed, thank you, while a prosecutor reads files behind her eyes. Because somewhere she absorbed the rule that armored people are not allowed to bleed. So let us take the counterfeit apart. Plainly, piece by piece, a soldier in full armor still feels afraid. Fear is not a breach in the wall. It is information arriving from a real battlefield. And courage has never meant the absence of fear. It means fear did not get the vote. The bravest men in the ancient world stood in shield lines with their hearts slamming against the inside of their breastplates. The breastplate did not stop the pounding. It stopped the spear. Those are different jobs. A soldier in full armor still weeps. Look anywhere in the record. David, a man of war from his youth, filled the Psalms with tears. And those Psalms became scripture, which means God took the crying of an armed man and made it holy writ. Jesus himself, the night before the cross, in a garden, sweating, in anguish, asking if there was another way. If tears disqualified a fighter, heaven would have said so in the garden. Heaven sent an angel to strengthen him instead. Tears are not a crack in the armor. Sometimes tears are the armor working. Pressure finding an exit that is not a sin. A soldier in full armor still gets tired. And here, the old record gets almost tender. There is a prophet in the Old Testament, Elijah, who won the most spectacular spiritual showdown of his era on a mountaintop. Fire from heaven. A nation on its knees. Total victory. And within days, one threat from one queen, and he ran into the desert, sat down under a tree, and asked God to let him die. I have had enough. Lord, he said, now watch what God actually does with a collapsed warrior. Because this is one of the most quietly radical scenes in Scripture. No rebuke, no lecture about armor. God let him sleep. Then an angel woke him with fresh-baked bread and water, and let him sleep again, and fed him again. Sleep, food, sleep, food, and only later, much later, a gentle question and a new assignment. The creator of the universe looked at a burned-out servant and prescribed a nap and 2 meals. Write that down somewhere. You will find it on your worst day. Sometimes the most spiritual thing a soldier can do is eat something and go to bed. And a soldier in full armor still needs help that armor cannot give. And this must be said in this file directly, carefully, because getting it wrong costs lives. Some battles in this broken world are not only spiritual. Depression can have chemistry in it. Trauma leaves real tracks in the body and the brain. Science is only beginning to map how deep. Burnout is a physiological event, not a character flaw. And a believer fighting on those fronts may need a pastor, and also a doctor, and also a counselor. And reaching for all 3 is not a failure of faith. It is the belt of truth doing its job, telling the truth about what kind of wound this is. The Roman army understood this better than some churches do. A legionary who took a blade in the shoulder was carried to the medicus, the field surgeon, and treated, and given time. And nobody in the camp called him a deserter. Nobody stood over the surgery telling him a stronger soldier would have healed by willpower. Using the medicine God allowed humans to discover is not a breach of the armor. And hear this clearly. The cruelest misuse of this entire passage is to take the language of spiritual warfare and aim it at the wounded. Telling a depressed believer their sadness is weak faith. Telling a trauma survivor to just stand firm. That is not the armor of God. That is using the armor as a weapon against the very people it was forged to protect. And the man in the Roman rented room, the one with the thorn and the tears and the despair on record, would be the first on his feet to object. So then, what does standing firm actually mean? If it does not mean feeling invincible, Strip away the counterfeit, and the answer left standing is smaller, harder, and better. Standing firm means you are still at your post. That is all. And that is everything. The soldier shaking in the shield line, heart hammering, hands unsteady, tears cutting lines through the dust on his face. Holding position. That man is standing firm. Nobody sings about him. He is the whole battle. There are seasons of life when victory does not look like triumph. It looks like not deserting. Days when the entire war report reads, "He did not leave." She prayed one sentence. "He got out of bed and fed the kids." She did not pick the bottle back up today. The world calls that barely surviving. Heaven, which has better eyesight, files it under, holding the line. Armor is not denial. Armor is protection while facing reality. And the two could not be more different. Denial closes its eyes and calls the battlefield a garden. Armor keeps its eyes open, sees every arrow, feels the weight of every blow, and stays. Paul despaired, and stayed, wept, and stayed, begged 3 times for relief, heard no, and stayed at his post for years, chained to it. In the end, literally, the armor never once made him feel strong. It made him remain. Feelings are weather. Remaining is war. But the moment you see that clearly, a colder question walks in, and it deserves the honesty this chapter has been practicing. Remaining at your post, shaking, weeping, holding, that is noble. And it is also, on some nights, unbearable. And everyone who has actually done it knows the word for those nights. The word is alone. If the fight is invisible, and the armor is personal, gear hung on one soldier, wrapped around one body, then is that the final shape of this whole file. 10,000 isolated believers, each in their own dark kitchen, each holding their own line, each dying a little from the loneliness of wars no one else can see. It is time to pay the debt from chapter 5. The flat edges on the shield. The armor with no plate on the back. 2 details. Planted chapters apart. And they lock together into one answer. And the answer is the reason, the loneliest sentence in your head. The one that says you were meant to fight this alone. Is not just cruel. It is a lie about the equipment itself. Somewhere on a frontier of the empire, a Roman column is pinned in a valley, and the sky is about to go dark with arrows. The enemy holds the high ground on both sides. Archers stacked on the slopes, and there are minutes, maybe less, before the volleys come. What happens next is one of the most famous sights in ancient warfare, drilled 10,000 times on parade grounds for exactly this moment. An officer shouts a command, and the column transforms. The front rank snaps their shields forward. Edge, locked to edge. A wall. The men on the flanks turn their shields outward, sealing the sides. And every soldier in the middle raises his scutum flat overhead. Rim fitted against rim, overlapping like roof tiles, until the entire formation disappears under a single shell of wood and leather. The Romans called it the testudo, the tortoise. From the slopes, it no longer looked like men at all, just a slow, armored creature crawling forward. And when the arrows came down, thousands of them, they rattled off the shell like hail off a roof. Ancient historians describe testudo formations, walking through storms of missiles and coming out the far side, essentially intact, and describe defenders on city walls watching in something close to despair as the tortoise came on. Arrow-proof, unstoppable, patient. Now, the detail this file made you hold since chapter 5. The flat edges. Remember standing on that wall, looking at the scutum, noticing the strange, squared-off rims, and being told to wait. Here is the payoff. A shield built only for one man would be round, and plenty of ancient shields were. Round protects a lone fighter equally in every direction. Rome cut the edges flat for one reason. Flat edges lock. The scutum was designed at the drawing board before a single one was built, on the assumption that there would always be another shield beside it. The testudo was not a clever trick soldiers invented with round shields. The shield itself was manufactured for the formation, which means every Roman soldier carried, in his own hands, every day, a piece of equipment that physically did not make full sense alone. The gear itself was a doctrine. You were built to fight next to someone, and now pay the second debt. The one from Chapter 3. The detail about the breastplate that made no sense at the time. The lorica wrapped the chest, the sides, the shoulders, and left the back almost bare. If you picture a lone soldier, that is insane design. A duelist can be circled, and every fighter alone in an open field eventually gets attacked from behind. But Rome did not design armor for duelists. Rome designed armor for the line, and in the line, in formation, shoulder to shoulder with your unit. Your back never faces the enemy. Your back faces your brothers. The armor has no backplate because the backplate was never supposed to be metal. The backplate was the man behind you. Two separate pieces of equipment, the shield and the breastplate, and hammered into the design of both. The same sentence, in iron and leather. You were never meant to do this alone. Paul knew all of this. He spent years chained to these men, shift after shift. He heard the drill commands in his sleep, and when he wrote the armor passage, he wrote it in a way English quietly hides from us. Nearly every you in the passage is plural. Put on the whole armor. You all. Together. Stand. You all. Side by side. He was not writing to a soldier. He was writing to an army. One letter, read aloud, to a room full of people standing shoulder to shoulder. And he told the room to get dressed, which drags into the light the most effective military strategy the enemy of your soul has ever run. Watch any predator on any nature documentary, and you will see it in the first 2 minutes. No predator charges the herd. The predator works the edges, cuts one animal out, walks it away from the others, and only then, in the isolation it manufactured, does the killing start. The strategy is older than Rome and newer than your last bad month. And against believers, it does not use teeth. It uses 4 whispers, and you have heard every one of them. Shame says, do not tell anyone. If they knew what you did, what you struggle with, they would be done with you. So the woman in the church hallway smiles on schedule and walks her file back home alone. 6 weeks and counting. Fear says, no one would understand. Your battle is too strange, too specific, too dark to say out loud. So the man from the parking lot answers, how are you doing? With, fine, busy, good. 3 lies in 4 words. Every day for months. Bitterness says, you tried people. Remember, you opened up once and it was mishandled. Never again. And this whisper is the craftiest, because it holds a real receipt, a real wound from a real church, a real friend who failed. And it uses one bad chapter of community to sentence you to a lifetime of solitary. And pride says, handle it yourself. Needing people is weakness. Strong believers fight alone. Pride even quotes this very file back at you. Look, your armor, your stand, your war. 4 voices. One goal. And the goal is never comfort. Whatever the voices claim, the goal is separation from the herd. Because every predator knows what Rome knew from the other side. The one who fights alone loses alone. It is barely even a fight at that point. It is arithmetic. So the question is what locking shields actually looks like now. Tonight, for a person with a phone and a kitchen and no legion in sight. And the answer has to be more honest than the church brochure version. So here is the honest version. It does not primarily mean attending a building. You can sit in a crowded sanctuary every Sunday of your life, surrounded, smiling, greeted by name, and be in perfect isolation. The woman in the hallway has proven it for 6 straight weeks. Proximity is not formation. A pile of shields is not a testudo. Locking shields means at minimum one thing: that somewhere on earth there is at least one person of real faith who knows the actual file. Not the resume. The file. The 2 in the morning arrows, by name. The 2019 folder. The gap in your armor, where the whisper gets to 3 feet. One person who can hear all of it without flinching and without gossip, who will hold a shield over the part of you that cannot currently hold one, and who has permission, standing permission, to say hard, true things to you slowly. Find that one person, and you have left the open field. The tortoise starts at 2, and choose that person with open eyes. Because this too must be said honestly. Not every group that calls itself a shield wall is one. There are communities that protect and communities that consume. And the test between them is old and reliable. A safe formation guards your weakness while it heals. A dangerous one collects your weakness as leverage. Safe community tells you the truth, even when it costs them your approval. Dangerous community tells you what keeps you compliant. Safe community makes you more able to stand on your own 2 boots over time. Dangerous community needs you never to. The shield wall protects the soldier. It does not own him. If you have been wounded by the counterfeit, and many reading this have, the record here is not that you misjudged all formations. It is that you met a false one. And the false ones are precisely why the true ones matter. Discernment. Yes. Total withdrawal. No. Not every person gets the file. That is wisdom. But no person getting the file. That is the open field. And on the open field, the arithmetic always finishes the same way. One more thing sits at the end of the armor passage. And it is time to read it. Because almost everybody stops quoting Paul one sentence too early. Belt, breastplate, boots, shield, helmet, sword, and then, without so much as a paragraph break, the very next words out of the prisoner's mouth. And pray, in the Spirit, on all occasion, with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert, and always keep on praying. And here is the phrase to underline. For all the saints, people sometimes call prayer the 7th piece of armor, and the instinct is understandable. But look at what Paul actually wrote. He did not add a 7th item to the kit. He described what the whole kit runs on. Praying on all occasions is not one more strap to buckle. It is the breathing of the armored man, the always underneath the equipment, the thing a soldier does continuously or begins to die, generally. Armor without prayer is a museum display, correct in every detail and empty inside. And then look where the breathing is aimed. For all the saints, even here, at the very end, at the most private act a believer has, the prisoner will not let you picture yourself alone. Real prayer, the kind that keeps armor alive, spends half its breath on the shields beside you. Praying for the soldier on your left is how you hold a shield over him from any distance on earth. It is the formation, continued by other means. And it is available tonight. From a kitchen, from a hallway, from a parked car. No legion required. So the armor is complete, and the formation is explained, and the breathing is described. And that is everything, except for the one question this file has owed you since the first minutes. The oldest question on the table. The man who wrote all of this. The man in the rented room. The chain. The scribe. The lamp. You were promised at the beginning that he knew something about winning that the whole visible world had missed. That he wrote like a free man while wearing an empire's iron. It is time to collect, because the guard shifts changed, and the seasons changed. And one day the letter was finished and sealed and carried out the door toward Ephesus. And the man who dictated it stayed behind with his chain. And history knows what came for him next. The story does not end the way you would write it. It ends better. But you will need the whole last chapter to see why. And you will need to stand in one more room. The smallest one yet. The letter is finished. Picture the last hour of it. The scribe reads the whole thing back by lamplight, the way scribes did, while the author listens with his eyes closed. And the soldier on the other end of the chain stands through one more shift of a job he will never understand. Somewhere near the end of the reading come the words, "This entire file has been living inside. Put on the whole armor of God. Stand against the schemes of the devil. And having done all, stand." Then hot wax. A seal. And the letter goes out the door in the hands of a courier named Tychicus. Down the stairs. Into the streets of Rome. Toward a ship. Toward Ephesus. Toward 2,000 years of readers who have not been born yet. The old man watches the door close. The chain stays. Now let the record tell you what history did with him next. Because you were promised this at the beginning. And the promise comes due tonight. The house arrest ended. And the early records suggest he walked free for a time. A few more years of roads and letters and churches. Then Rome burned. And an emperor needed someone to blame. And Nero chose the Christians. And the machinery of the empire went looking for their leaders. Paul was arrested again. And the second imprisonment was nothing like the first. No rented room this time. No scribe. No visitors coming and going. Tradition places him in something closer to a hole. Cold. Dark. A dungeon where a man waited for a verdict everyone already knew. From that place he wrote one last letter that survives. To a young pastor named Timothy. And in it you can hear a man reading his own file honestly. "The time for my departure is near," he wrote. "Everyone in the province of Asia has deserted me. At my first defense, no one came to my support. Bring the cloak I left in Troas. It is cold, and an old man wants his coat." Then, on a day history did not bother to record precisely, soldiers walked him outside the walls of Rome, down the road toward Ostia. He was a Roman citizen, which spared him the cross and granted him the sword. Somewhere along that road, the sentence was carried out. A blade, a moment, and the man who wrote about armor was gone. Sit with the plain arithmetic of that ending, and do not rush past it, OT, because the whole meaning of this file lives inside it. If victory means survival, he lost. If victory means freedom, he lost. He died in chains he had worn on and off for a decade. If victory means vindication, he lost. The empire called him a criminal, and the empire's word was the only word that counted. The man who wrote, "Take up the shield of faith," was executed by the state that held him. Stand there, on the road to Ostia, and every visible measurement agrees. Rome won. Paul lost. Case closed. Except, go back and read the letter again. The one that went out the door with Tychicus. And notice something hiding in plain sight. something you can check for yourself tonight. In the entire armor passage, Paul never once uses the words you would expect from a man promising victory. He never says conquer. He never says escape. He never says win. Not once. Not anywhere in the passage. The word he uses, 4 times in a handful of sentences, hammered like a drum beat, is stand, that you may be able to stand, withstand in the evil day, having done all, to stand. Stand firm, therefore. 4 times. A man does not repeat a word 4 times by accident. Not a writer, this good. He repeats it because it is the entire message, and because he knew his readers, and us, would keep trying to swap it out for a different word. He was never promising you would win the visible war. He knew better than anyone alive that the visible war does what it wants. He had the scars, the chain, and eventually the road to Ostia to prove it. He was promising something else, something the visible war cannot touch. That when the lies came for your grip on reality, you could still be standing. That when the file was read against your heart at midnight, you could still be standing. That when the ground moved, when the arrows burned, when the narrator reached for your ending, when the whisper closed to 3 feet, you could still be standing, not unbeaten, unmoved, and on the road outside Rome. In the last seconds, by that one measure, the only measure he ever actually wrote down. The old man was undefeated. They took his freedom, his friends, his years, and finally, his head. There is no record that they ever took his ground. And then time, which is God's favorite witness, took the stand. The empire that killed him kept being the empire for a while. Nero was dead within a few years of Paul. Disgraced, ending his own life in a villa outside the city. The empire itself cracked, and split, and staggered on, and fell. And today, the throne room of the Caesars is a ruin where tourists stand in line for photographs. The most powerful machine of force the world had ever built is now a stop on a walking tour. That is what became of the side that won, and the letter. The piece of parchment dictated by a chained man in a rented room to a small congregation in a mid-sized city. It was copied. Then the copies were copied. It crossed the sea, crossed the centuries, crossed every border the empire ever drew, and 10,000 borders drawn since. It has been translated into thousands of languages, carried into prisons and palaces and hospital hallways, read at gravesides and kitchen tables, whispered from memory in places where owning it is still a crime. Tonight, right now, somewhere in the world, in more places than anyone can count, someone is reading the words that went out the door with Tychicus. You are one of them. This file, this thing you have been listening to, is that letter, still moving, still arriving. 20 centuries after the man who wrote it stopped breathing, the soldier, chained to his wrist, served his shifts and vanished. Name unrecorded. Into the dark of history. The guard is gone. The prisoner is still speaking. So here, finally, is the answer you were promised in the first 2 minutes. The thing the man in chains knew that the whole visible world had missed. He knew that there are 2 wars running at all times. The one everyone can see, and the one no one can see. And that they keep different scoreboards. And that only one of the scoreboards is permanent. Rome was winning the visible war. And Rome is rubble. Paul was losing the visible war. And Paul's invisible stand outlived the civilization that killed him. The battles no one else can see turned out to be the only battles whose outcomes last forever. That is not a preacher's flourish. That is the documented record. You can go stand in the ruins and check, which leaves just one piece of unfinished business. Because this file did not start in Rome. It started in a parking lot at 8:57 on a Tuesday morning. with an engine ticking as it cooled. 3 people were left on their battlefields in the opening minutes. A man in a car, a woman in a hallway, a father in a dark kitchen. And you were told the world would never see their wars. That is still true, but you have seen them. And before the lamps go out, you deserve to know how their battles went. 8:59, Tuesday morning. The man in the parking lot opens the car door. Understand what did not happen first. The sentence from 2 in the morning did not die. It rode with him up the elevator. They are about to find out you do not belong here. Same words, same voice. What changed is smaller than a miracle and more useful. Somewhere around 8:58, he laid the evidence next to the verdict. 14 seconds of a boss running a long meeting against a life sentence written in the dark. And he refused to let them trade places. The voice kept talking. It just was not in command anymore. He walked in, and the day was ordinary, and the meeting at 10 was fine. And nobody found out anything because there was nothing to find out. The sentence will probably come back Thursday, around 2. The way it does. He will lay it next to the evidence again. That is not glamorous. Belts never were. You cinch them every morning, or they do not work. And he is learning to cinch it. 1 dark hour at a time. Sunday. 11 days later. The woman from the hallway stays after the service. She has rehearsed this and unrehearsed it a dozen times. There is an older woman in that congregation. Someone with gray in her hair and a face that has clearly been through weather. Someone who has never once repeated a thing told in confidence. The younger woman waits until the crowd thins, and her heart is slamming the way hearts do at the top of the high dive. And she says 7 words she has not said in 6 weeks of Sundays. Do you have time to talk sometime? That is all. Not the file. Not yet. Not the folder marked 2019. Just the door opening 1 inch. The older woman looks at her for a moment, and something in her face says she knows exactly what kind of sentence that was, because she once said a version of it herself. She says, I have time right now. What happens next is not recorded in this file, because it belongs to the 2 of them and to the God who was listening. But know this about the mechanics of it. The moment the words left her mouth, a 6-week siege broke. The prosecutor's entire case depended on a sealed courtroom. No witnesses. No counsel. The defendant alone at the stand. Night after night. She just unsealed it. Shame can shout down a woman alone at 2 in the morning. It has a much harder time when there are 2 shields locked rim to rim. And an old soldier is standing at her shoulder, saying, I have heard the whole file, and I am not going anywhere. The trial may reconvene. Trials do. It will never again be held in an empty room. And the father in the kitchen, his war took the longest, because his war was closest. The night he put the phone face down and drew the old sentence like a blade. That was real, and it held. But you know, and he knew, that a deleted message is not a discharged war. The number was blocked. The memory was not. So mark the night that actually turned it. 3 evenings later, his wife is at the sink. The kids are down, and he walks in and hands her his phone, unlocked, and says, I need to tell you about a message I got last week, and about why it scared me. That sentence cost him more than any other act in this entire file. It was also the end of the Whisper's best weapon, because the Whisper's whole arsenal was secrecy. No one will know, and he just made sure someone knows. The conversation was hard. Parts of it were harder than hard. And when it was over, the 2 of them were standing in the same trench for the first time in a long time. And a fight he could have lost alone in the dark became a fight they hold together in the light. His shield has a shield locked to it now. The armor finally fits the way it was drawn. 3 people, 3 wars, Notice what you did not get, because it was withheld on purpose. No promotion, no standing ovations, no scene where the music swells. The man still has that boss. The woman still has that history. The father still has that memory. And some nights, it still knocks. Their circumstances are almost exactly what they were in the opening minutes of this file. What changed is that all three of them are still at their posts. Dressed, gripped, shielded, and no longer alone. And if that ending feels small to you, go back and read the only promise the man in chains ever actually made. He never promised the battle would end. He promised you could be standing when the sun came up. All three of them were, by the only scoreboard that lasts. That is not a small ending. That is the whole war. Won the only way it is ever won. One held position at a time. So now it comes to you. And it should. Because this was never really about a parking lot in one city, or a prison in another. Somewhere in your life there is a battle no one else can see. You have known which one since about chapter 2. Maybe it is the sentence that circles at 2 in the morning. Maybe it is a file with a year on it that some voice keeps reading into the dark. Maybe the ground is moving under you right now. A diagnosis. A job. A marriage. And every hour brings a new demand to panic. Maybe the arrows are coming in flights. Or the narrator is reaching for your pen. Or the whisper has closed to 3 feet and knows your name. No one at your work knows. Maybe no one in your house knows. That has always been the enemy's favorite arrangement. Here is what you now know that you did not know an hour ago. There is armor for that exact war. And it is not a metaphor for trying harder. Truth, cinched around your middle, holding the file apart from the fiction. A verdict over your heart that your history cannot overturn, because someone else paid it. Grip under your feet that the situation cannot revoke. A shield that goes up soaked, before the fire, never during. A helmet that guards the one room where the ending gets written. And a short blade, kept sharp in the scabbard, for the range where everything else fails. 6 pieces, 1 body, designed, every rivet of it, on the assumption that there would be another shield beside yours. And here is the last thing, the thing to actually do. Because a Roman soldier did not admire his armor. He put it on, and he put it on every single morning of his service. Nobody wore armor once and called it settled. So, tomorrow morning, before the foam, before the noise, before the first arrow of the day is even in the air, take 60 seconds and dress. Name the pieces. Out loud if you can bear it. On by on. Truth around my life. Righteousness over my heart. Peace beneath my feet. Faith raised against the fire. Salvation guarding my mind. The word of God ready in my hand. 60 seconds. It is not a magic spell. Nothing in this file was ever magic. It is a soldier answering roll call before a battle he cannot see and refuses to enter naked. Do it tomorrow. Do it the morning after. Reflexes are built exactly that slowly, and exactly that surely. The armor of God does not promise that your battles will become visible, or brief, or easy. It promises something better. It promises that you will never again walk into them unprotected, and that when the night is long, and the fight is invisible, and no one on earth can see you holding the line, heaven can. And heaven keeps the permanent score. An old man in chains wrote that to you from a rented room 2,000 years ago. And then he proved it with everything he had left. Standing is not a small victory. Some nights, standing is the whole war. Stand.